Hey guys, my name is Build of the League, and this build is focused around Common Calamity body armor. And in the past I already did 2 auto-heralds builds, so I didn't want to make another same build, so this time I went with Ignites. Actually, long ago, before damage over time got nerfed, I remember seeing, I think, Rise QT playing with a similar idea and igniting enemies with Herald of Thunder. And for some reason that build idea stuck in my head, so I'm revisiting this idea with more tools to build around it. Mainly Stormfire ring, which allows you to ignite with your lightning damage. Now I'm gonna quickly talk about pros and cons, how this build works, items and leveling process, skills and links, and passive skill tree. As always, in video description you can find timestamps and path of building import code. Since last time it seems that people enjoyed reading YouTube's attempts to translate what I'm speaking, you may want to enable subtitles which are automatically generated for some extra laughs. So, pros and cons. It is pretty fast leveling, you don't really need to do anything besides once in a while shocking enemies, and it is mainly for mapping and not really for big bosses, so you can kind of do up to tier 15 maps. However, this build is pretty squishy, because both rings, amulet and body armor gives absolutely no life. So the life pool is only around 5000 at around level 87, could be higher if you could get better jewels, but with this kind of life pool you don't really want to go into higher tier maps. I do get a combined 300,000 DPS against Shaper and Guardians, but that's really not suitable for that. I did manage to defeat Phoenix, but it wasn't a pleasant fight. I did run quite few red tier maps, but even without any damage mods, it just felt squishy. Of course, if you know what you're doing, you could modify this build and be a bit more defensive. Also, this build kind of requires 6 to 7 unique items, which are not that expensive, but it limits build flexibility and viability for League start. And also in Delve League, the Common Calamity body armor may become more expensive because we are getting 2 new heralds. So if you only care about investment and returns, then this build is not for you. Oh, and one last drawback is that this build becomes extremely boring very fast. All you do is run. You could actually leap slam or maybe even shield charge, but that is still basically just a walking simulator. Okay, so how does this build work? Well, a quick summary is you use Stormfire to ignite with your Herald of Thunder. You have proliferation because of Elementalist. When you hit with Herald of Thunder, you also trigger elemental equilibrium on enemies, increasing the ignite damage we take because you are dealing purely lightning damage. Also, because of Eye of Innocence, you are dealing some fire damage to yourself each time you ignite an enemy. Combined with Moko's Embrace ring, that allows you to ignite yourself and get increased damage while ignited from Eye of Innocence. And because of Paragon of Calamity node, each time you get hit by fire damage, you also increase fire damage by 40% and also take 8% reduced damage from fire. Now, since Leech isn't really an option, I am using Razor of the 7th Sun. This weapon recovers 1% of my maximum life each time I ignite an enemy, and also gives 100% increased burning damage if you have ignited an enemy recently. For that reason, I do carry Writhing Jar, which allows me to usually shock those worms, trigger Herald of Thunder, which then ignites bosses, and trigger all the previous mentioned buffs. As for my second weapon, I decided to use Doriana's Catalyst because it just gives a lot of elemental damage. Also, it is very important to note that heralds are not spells, so items that give flat elemental damage to spells would not do anything. Things like Abyssal Jewels with flat lightning damage to spells, Doriana's Touch Gloves with lightning damage to spells, all the other mods with elemental damage to spells would do nothing. But also remember elemental equilibrium, so you need to be sure that you have no added fire damage to spells anywhere, because Orb of Storms is a spell and can be affected by flat added damage to spells. Also, because this is Elementalist, you will be shocking even strongest bosses. However, in path of building I did not select enemy is shocked, because that would provide stronger shock than you actually can do. Instead I modified a Basalt Flask, which basically simulates all the buffs. I do use gloves with global blind chance, provide some extra defensive layer, boots with a lot of flat life and spell dodge, leather belt, nothing special, just a lot of life and resistances, one abyssal jewel with onslaught on kill, which does help improve my clear speed, and then jewels with life and resistances, which I still need, and one careful planning jewel because this build needs quite a lot of dex, and the simplest way to get that is just to convert intelligence into dex. Now, as for the leveling items, since Stormfire ring is level 80, there is a trick to still be able to ignite with Herald of Thunder. For that you need 2 Call of the Brotherhood rings, which would convert 80% of your lightning damage into cold, and then use Rim-Burn Gloves, which allows your cold damage to ignite. Alternatively, instead of Rim-Burn Gloves, you could use Free Dragon Helmet, but then you would lose ability to shock, unless you use some fire hitting spell, which you do not want if you use Elemental Equilibrium. Also, I'm not sure if I should mention, but for some reason people on the stream kept asking why I'm not using Pyre Ring to convert the cold damage into fire. Hello, 2 Call of the Brotherhood rings. As for body armor, I just used +2 duration tabla, since Herald of Thunder does have a duration tag. And it's not really worth using Eye of Innocence until level 80 when you can equip Stormfire, so I was just using Defensive Amulet. For leveling I was also using the Dark Seer's Scepter, which does give life and generic damage, and also used the shield because I needed more life. Also, I did not use Elemental Equilibrium until much later on, and I did use some spell, I can't really remember what, for leveling, but it doesn't matter, you just choose whichever spell you like. Now for skills and links. The main setup for Herald of Thunder inside the Common Calamity body armor are the lightning damage, deadly ailments, burning damage, combustion, and swift affliction. Now instead of combustion you could actually use unbound ailments, which would also increase your shock effectiveness, but then you would have to link combustion with Orb of Storms. And currently my Orb of Storms is linked with Curse on Hit, Elemental Weakness, and Increased Critical Strike Chance. Without Increased Critical Strike Chance, I just did not feel comfortable, because it was a bit too unreliable to trigger Elemental Overload without Critical Strike Chance. Next for Scorching Ray, I do have Remorse Resolve Helmet, +2 to duration. Unfortunately, Socket's colors were not that great, so I am linking with Burning Damage, Empower level 3, and Efficacy. Elemental Focus would be much better than Empower level 3. It's even better than Empower level 4. Also, this helmet does increase your fire damage and makes you immune to chill and freezes if you use the fire skill recently. But instead you could just use Elder Helmet with burning damage and use Control Destruction and Elemental Focus instead. Contrary to what many people think, Herald of Ash does not increase the burning damage. More burning damage modifier on Herald of Ash only gives more burning damage to Herald of Ash. It does however give you more fire spell damage, but that's only effective for Scorching Ray, so it is not worth using Herald of Ash. Wrath Aura also does not give any damage to you, because it only gives damage to attacks and spells, and heralds are not spells. So since there wasn't much else to use to reserve my mana, I decided to use Blasphemy with Enfeeble, which does help a lot with survivability, and also I am using low level Clarity, just enough to have enough regen for Scorching Ray, but also enough mana to cast couple other spells. For moving, I was mostly using Phase Run with increased duration, but I also had Leap Slam, unfortunately without faster attacks since I don't really have enough sockets for that, but depends on what you like. You could just use Leap Slam with faster attacks Fortify and not even use Phase Run. Just make sure that you have Doriana's Fist in the main hand, unless you're using Brightbeak. And after I finished Uberlab, which by the way wasn't that difficult, the damage from Ignite was surprisingly decent. Anyway, after Uberlab, I took Liege of the Primordial and started using cast when damage taken with Summon Flame Golem and Summon Chaos Golem. In my case, I'm using level 7 cast when damage taken with level 9 Chaos and Flame Golem. I auto-summon those golems each time I take around 1000 damage. And if you don't like golems, I guess just take Pendulum of Destruction. Talking about passive skill tree, first obviously I took Beacon of Ruin, then Paragon of Calamity, and Liege of the Primordial. And that is the rest of my passive skill tree. Taking fire and lighting damage nodes, second curse, elemental overload, elemental equilibrium, careful planning goes here for the decks, and you see the rest. And that is all for this build. And after finishing this build, I vaulted most of my items, at least over 100 of my items, deleted most of my expensive currency, so I'm fully prepared for the next league, which is hopefully gonna be the best league ever, at least in my opinion. I mean, we are getting beans, custom loot sounds, new socketable currency, oh, and also Delve League, but mostly beans. And until I see new patch notes, I'm not gonna plan a build, and I'm not gonna be streaming until then, but I will do one more stream before the league launch, once we get patch notes to talk about patch notes and to plan builds, and I'm not sure if I'm gonna do any more videos until couple days in the league. So if you want to catch me streaming, check with the description for the link, and you will also see my streaming schedule. I wish everyone a good league start, thank you for watching, and see you in the Delve. Beans!